Hi, I'm Tom Burgess, and you're listening to The Real Agenda, the podcast for political change. Now, today we're going to be talking about the ongoing crisis of homelessness and how it can be fixed. Because it can be fixed, and we can bring change. Surely we all agree that we all deserve a safe, stable place to live. But more than 160,000 households across Britain are experiencing the worst forms of homelessness right now. It doesn't have to be that way. In other parts of the world, they are taking huge strides towards ending homelessness, and we can do the same here. But in order to truly end all forms of homelessness, long-term action and truly cross-government working will be needed. But with enough political will and commitment, we can end homelessness once and for all. To find out more about the current state of homelessness in Britain, how it can be both tackled and prevented, and what we can do to bring change, I went to Crisis, the charity for homeless people, in Commercial Road, East London, just a quarter of a mile away from the City of London financial districts, and I went to speak to Matt Downie. Matt has been the Director of Policy and External Affairs at Crisis since 2014, and before that he worked for Action for Children, the National Autistic Society and Shelter. He is responsible for Crisis' political influencing work, its communications, its research into the causes and the solutions to homelessness, and for the evaluation of services. He spent a year putting together a comprehensive plan to end homelessness, nearly 500 pages of data analysis and recommendation, plus some amazing, very sad stories. So I started by asking Matt to give us an update on the state of homelessness in the UK.
Homelessness is more than just rough sleeping. It's just really important to say that from the offset. And when you take the definition of homelessness to be people who are on the streets, but they're in hostels, they're in night shelters, they're in refuges, people living in beds in sheds, living on public transport, tents, cars, and also people sleeping on, other people's kitchen floors, people who are forced to kind of do what we call sofa surfing. That adds up to around about 170,000 households and individuals, which is more than it was a few years ago and is still projected to continue to rise. But I would say that within that, the numbers in Scotland haven't gone up anywhere near as fast as in England, and in Wales they've gone up slightly, but England is mostly where the increases are happening.
So why is this happening?
Well, the leading cause of homelessness now is really straightforward. At its most kind of simple, it's people not being able to pay their rent. So we used to talk about homelessness being a complex set of kind of personal issues, relationship breakdown, the sort of interweaving of mental health issues and substance misuse and all that kind of stuff. Actually, that's just not what the truth is of this. The truth is that the property market, particularly the private rented market, is completely overheated, and that if for those people experiencing the constant pressure of transient and lower wages, people who are on benefits that don't meet the cost of renting, that pressure leads people into homelessness far too often, and a loss of a private tenancy in the short term is by far the leading cause now. And so what we're really talking about is a set of people who what they really needed was the financial stability to maintain their housing, particularly their rental housing, or some short-term fix to prevent it turning into homelessness.
So clearly there's not enough being done.
We talk a lot at Crisis about the sort of moment we're in here, where in some ways, ironically and sadly, you get most attention on homelessness when it gets really bad. And so that opens a window of opportunity for the right political response. And we're unequivocal in saying that the vast majority of the causes of homelessness and the potential solutions to homelessness are policy-based. This isn't an individual choice question, this is a policy question. And so with that reality, we look around at a series of different interventions. So it's fascinating that in a UK context, homelessness is a devolved issue to governments in England, Scotland and Wales. And in Scotland, it's a situation where there is essentially a right to rehousing for all homeless people. The housing supply is being invested in, particularly of social housing. It's not perfect, but it's on its way. And a set of new kind of reforms are coming through over the next couple of years to give people access more quickly to that accommodation and the support they need. Now, that's very different from England and Wales. So in England, we've seen the social housing stock be destroyed over successive governments and over decades, particularly since Right to Buy, but it goes back further than that in terms of the lack of additional stock. And we're now in a situation where we need to see 90,000 units of additional social housing every year for the next 15 years to meet the backlog of need and future need for homeless households.
And what's it running at now?
About 5,000 in England. And that's not something that's not achievable. We've got to that level, far higher than that level, in fact, many, many years in the past, particularly in the kind of post-war years, but also running up to the sort of 70s as well. And probably it's true to say that there now is a cross-party consensus on the need not just to address the housing crisis, but on a large part of the solution to that being social housing. But such is the destruction of the mechanics to build it, in terms of the financial arrangements and incentives for local government, for housing associations, and then obviously the scandal really of not replacing the stock that's been sold through Right to Buy means that in some ways we've got to stop going backwards before we go forwards on the housing issue. So that's a key plank of this for policy in England. And then something that applies to the whole of the UK is the interplay between the benefit system and homelessness. And we're in a situation now where about 95% of the country is now unaffordable on housing benefit, and unaffordable for single people or families with one or two children. And so what that means is people have to meet the shortfall in rent through other benefits under universal credit. So you have to choose whether to feed or clothe your family or pay the rent, or through debt. It's no surprise that we therefore see people not being able to pay their rent as the leading cause. So there's a series of policy levers on the structures behind homelessness. And then there's a very important thing to say about how homelessness policy applies once it's happened. So it's a very sort of legally heavy world where in England, Scotland and Wales, homeless people themselves have some rights and entitlements to accommodation. In England and in Wales, you have to be deemed to be vulnerable or to have dependent children. And if you're not deemed to be either of those things, you'll be seen to be non-priority. And just walk around the streets of any major town and city in this country and you will see people who the council will have deemed to be non-vulnerable living and dying on our streets, which is obviously an offensive and clearly wrong situation to be in. So that legal response needs to be complete. So the only way to conceive of ending homelessness, and we entirely think that's possible, is to say that all homeless people can and should and will be entitled to help. So yes, prevention is 80% of the solution here, and prevention through people not losing their homes and having enough homes and benefits that cover the cost of rent. But if it does happen, what you then do really matters. So unconditional access to accommodation is really the only answer. For people with higher support needs, so typically entrenched rough sleepers, as some people are sometimes called, or people in hostels or night shelters with significant needs, what we need to see rolled out is a scheme called Housing First. And you may have heard in the media, because we talk a lot about it in the media, about some places around the world, particularly Finland, where homelessness has come down dramatically, and they don't have rough sleeping anymore or any hostels or night shelters, and they've done it through applying this Housing First scheme. Where
Tell us a bit more about Housing First then, and how might that work here?
So Housing First is a evidence-based programme where the idea is that instead of requiring people to be clean or sober or sane before they qualify for accommodation, people are given unconditional immediate access to a home of their own. And then, and this is crucial, they're also provided with the highest quality support. So, essentially it's a kind of high intensity social care intervention, but crucially, you won't lose your home if you don't engage in those services. And you won't lose those services if you somehow, are moved on from your accommodation. So it means that people are treated as adults rather than sort of supplicants to a homelessness service that requires you to be miraculously kind of amazing as a human being when going through the worst circumstances. It's just got an overwhelming evidence base, so 80 to 90% success rate in terms of ending homelessness for people that experience Housing First, but also reductions in criminal activity, increases in mental health, physical health, relationships being put back together, some people moving on to jobs, all of that kind of stuff means it's not simply a way to end homelessness, it's a way to help people put their lives back together. And there's a sort of key insight in the middle of this, which is that you or I would have a much better chance of sorting out our problems if we had somewhere to live compared to having to sort them out if you didn't. So that's really key. And so with the right infrastructure and funding and transition to this Housing First approach, I absolutely know with certainty that homelessness would dramatically come down in this country.
Because one of the things, apart from obviously ending the tragedy of homelessness, is the fact there's a financial aspect of it. In fact, I think you quote some figures that an investment of X is going to bring, actually 3 times as much in benefit, because some of the things you just talked about, we've got a better social outcomes, etc. What were those figures?
Yeah, so we recently published what we call a plan for ending homelessness, where if all of the right things happened, you would see no one sleeping rough, you would see nobody in accommodation that's not fit for human habitation, you would see everybody in emergency accommodation with immediate offers of accommodation, and prevention really work. And to get there, the set of policies and the set of services would cost the state, according to PwC, who did the figures for us, have worked out that over a 10-year period it would cost the state £9.9 billion, but accrue cost savings and benefits of £26.4 billion. So that means reductions in accessing other elements of the state, so that's A&Es, it's prisons, it's police services, it's all sorts of other things that cost more. And it's wrong just to look at the case for ending homelessness through a kind of economics, but if you need to go there, it's really absolutely clear that it's cheaper to end homelessness than to spend money keeping people homeless in, expensive hostels and night shelters.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? So it's staggering that we haven't got the political will. So what can we do about that to bring change that people say, yes, actually, we've got to do this?
So political will is interesting because there is political will to end rough sleeping. So the government in Westminster has a commitment to end rough sleeping, and that's great, and it's led to increases in funding for things like outreach. But the difference between political will to end rough sleeping and political will to end homelessness is, it might sound like a technicality, but in reality it's a big deal. Because to truly end homelessness means to truly see everyone as deserving and qualifying of somewhere to live. And that requires hard, long-term decisions to build and access social housing at a different scale, to take on the argument that there are somehow undeserving poor people in this country, and to say a civilized country in the 21st century doesn't think it's okay that 600 people a year are dying whilst homeless, that the average age of death is 47 for homeless people, that you're 16 times more likely to be a victim of crime if you're homeless, 9 times more likely to commit suicide, let alone the kind of financial catastrophe of having to spend money on something that's eminently solvable, and releasing the kind of, the potential of all of these people and families to do what they want to do in their lives. So the political will to do this, I think, is absolutely about saying that you don't want to just manage a kind of ongoing problem of homelessness. You see it as unacceptable in all its forms, and we can end it. And the reason for writing up a big plan on ending homelessness is to show decision makers that all the solutions really are there. It's not beyond the wit of man to put together a comprehensive government strategy across all departments to say we can do this and we will. And we think a 10-year time span is ample to be able to do it.
It's very comparatively easy to build affordable homes, but it's very difficult to get affordable land. How do we overcome that?
I think the question of land it's about how you look at the infrastructure of how we see housing developments work. And it's not acceptable that there is land available for particularly for social rent, and new development should have a proportion of social rent under the kind of regulations that stand. It's not okay for that to be sat empty. And I think a greater kind of national focus on forcing the development of property so that people aren't making money off the land and not using it for its intention, but also helping local government, because we've seen not just through kind of what local councils want to do in developments of new property, but also more widely in homelessness, that cuts to local government have really restricted the ability to tackle homelessness. And we're seeing preposterous kind of mitigations in place. So it was the Public Accounts Committee in the National Audit Office that said to government, on the one hand, you're creating homelessness through a set of policies, and on the other hand, local governments paying 1.1 billion a year in temporary accommodation to pick up the pieces. And in the middle of that, you've got human beings. And so the finances and kind of sense of agency and right to challenge these decisions at local government has been eroded. And that needs addressing, because otherwise we have this kind of slightly kind of localism with its hand tied behind its back approach to homelessness. And I think if we want to empower local communities that understand where the problems they have and they want to solve, and local government there to oversee it, you've got to make it work properly. And that interplay between local and national has been a real problem for homelessness.
So you painted a clear picture of the tragedy of homelessness in all its aspects and how we can prevent it as well as tackle it. But what can we, the people, do to make the sort of things you're talking about actually happen?
It's heartening to see that homelessness is now rising up the set of issues that people are raising with their local politicians, and particularly at election time potential politicians. And I would say that that is the answer. Is that we all need to require a systematic and better response from our politicians. And that's not just what can be done about an individual rough sleeper that you see, although that is vital. And there's a service called StreetLink, which is something that it's an app and a phone number that people can contact. It's also about expectation. Next time a decision maker wants to talk to you, wants to know your view, next time you want to campaign on something, this really matters. It's a cross-party issue. In Westminster, there is no one with a comprehensive answer on this yet. We've seen good proposals on rough sleeping from the government. We've seen good proposals on some other things from opposition parties. But none of it's comprehensive, none of it's cohesive, and so far we've seen no political proposals that will actually end homelessness, apart from with a fair wind what's been proposed in Scotland.
So you've got several campaigns and things that people could get involved in. Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit about that. So
if you are interested in joining our campaign to get the right big systematic policy response, we have a campaign called Everybody In. So you go to the Crisis website and you'll see it front and centre there and join that. And then underneath that there are a few things that we're looking at the moment that are smaller scale issues but nevertheless really important. So first and foremost, We're recording this on International Women's Day, and we're running a campaign to make sure that everybody who is a victim of domestic abuse gets unconditional access to housing if they're homeless, because at the moment there are people fleeing abuse that aren't seen as a priority. Also, we're really keen to make sure that the spending review, whenever it happens, and obviously there's a big Brexit in between, we don't know the specific timing, but when the next kind of big budget announcement comes through, we're looking to see a really significant investment in housing benefit to stop people being made homeless simply because their benefits don't cover their rent. And then the final thing I'll say is we're also running a campaign to scrap what's called the Vagrancy Act. Now, the Vagrancy Act goes back to 1824. You may be surprised to learn that it still stands today, and that England and Wales are two of the only countries left in the world that still prosecute people for the crime of being homeless. So it really still is true that in this country you can be arrested, charged and convicted for being homeless and destitute, and it does happen to people. So we're calling for that absolutely offensive and outdated legislation just to be scrapped as quickly as possible. So if you're interested in any of that, please come to our website and help us with our fight to end homelessness.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt, for that great overview. I hope to see significant action from the work that you're doing, and I hope we can make some real progress. So thanks very much for your time. I know you're very busy here, and I wish you all the best with what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
That was Matt Downie from Crisis, the charity for homeless people, and I'm very grateful for his time, and also heartfelt thanks to all the hard-working folk at Crisis and the army of volunteers. To find out more about their work and what you can do, go to crisis.org.uk. So I think the plan to end homelessness from Matt and his team at Crisis is very comprehensive. I have a print copy here. It's very heavy. It's like an old telephone directory, but it's not just a list of numbers. It outlines very clearly what can and needs to be done. So we don't need any more reports. It's all here. Crisis as a charity cannot do everything, and it's very important to work in partnership with other organisations to bring lasting social change. And as many realise, cuts to government spending at a local and national level have made matters worse. Incomes are still low, and costs of basic needs like housing have risen. So it's not surprising that there are record levels of debt and huge numbers who've been forced into homelessness. At the same time, the wealthy are getting wealthier, and that wealth comes from somewhere. It comes from us. We all create the wealth, and an increasing amount of that is in private ownership. This is all at the expense of those in poverty, hardship and homelessness. It's just not right. We should be asking those with significant wealth to invest more in the people of our nation. That's the right thing to do. And as Matt pointed out, the total cost of fixing homelessness is 19.3 billion, but it will bring benefits of 53.9 billion, taking thousands of families out of misery and giving them the opportunity for more fulfilled lives. So in just financial terms, it's a good investment with an excellent return. But as Nelson Mandela and others have reminded us, the presence of peace is not just the absence of conflict, but the feeling of well-being. So we are not at peace until we've solved poverty and homelessness and all that goes with it. Some of the fundamental aspects of our economic system need urgent attention. In fact, a lot of them do. My fellow campaigners at Taxpayers Against Poverty, who featured in episode 1 of The Real Agenda, as well as others who've been on The Real Agenda in the past, like London Assembly member Tom Copley in episode 12, stressed the need to abolish council tax and replace it with land value tax. This will mean that those that own valuable land will pay more, and tenants, that's 30% of households, will no longer pay council tax. Then if we can increase the minimum wage to a real living wage and cut income taxes for lower earners, families will have more money and the chance of getting into debt will be significantly reduced. But we still have to ensure that we have an adequate safety net. So what do you think? Do email us at tom@realagendaradio.org with your comments and ideas. Also, check out our website at realagendaradio.org, where you can sign up to receive regular updates. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. So what's coming up soon on the Real Agenda? We're moving out of the London bubble and we'll be in Manchester to speak exclusively to Sir Richard Leese, the leader of Manchester City Council and Deputy Mayor of Greater Manchester. We're going to find out what's going on and how Manchester is solving the problems of cities today and making progress. We will also be talking about compassion in politics with Jennifer Nadell, the former ITN Home Affairs editor and co-author of a book with Gillian Anderson called We, a Manifesto for Women Everywhere. That's all soon on the Real Agenda, the podcast for political change. And on the subject of podcasts, it was good to talk the other day to Hattie Schofield of the Simple Politics podcast about their show, which seeks to simplify the world of politics and helps you to stay on top of it. So give them a listen. In fact, it's more than a podcast. You can find out more at simplepolitics.co.uk, and we'll be featuring Hattie in a future episode. So do subscribe to your podcast provider so that you're notified of new episodes. And it would be great if you'd write a short review. And guess what? Several people have. We now have a 5 out of 5 star rating. It must be good. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. One thing's certain, people want to see change to a fairer society. It's urgent and it's up to us to make it happen. That's the Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening and I look forward to talking to you again soon.